Resiliency is funny. It's like the more difficult times you find yourself in, and the more difficult the situation, and you get through it, the easier it is to continue on after. So while staying resilient isn't necessarily a laughing matter, it does create better perspective when you can look back and laugh. My guest today has been around a startup or two, has been through a challenge or two, and his resiliency has not only allowed him to succeed, but to look to the future with a, oh, is that it? Kind of attitude. Stay tuned. Welcome to Invest Insights. I'm your host, Abby Lindenberg. Today, I am joined by Marcus Dantus, a Mexican entrepreneur and so-called shark, or tiburon, from Shark Tank, Mexico. After ending his studies in computer systems in Mexico early to pursue a degree in communications with a specialization in film at the University of Pennsylvania, Dantus ventured into web development, founding andcom. Following its success, Marcus entered in the digital domain industry with a focus on startups. Currently the CEO of Startup Mexico, he continues to innovate, driven by his desire to leave a lasting legacy. Marcus, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
On the contrary, thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. You know, I've been reading a lot about you, and I'm so interested to get to know you more professionally and the space that you are in. But I think that we should start with probably the most obvious, Shark Tank Mexico. What impact do you believe you're having on today's budding entrepreneurs being a shark?
Well, I'll tell you, I actually, the reason I joined was because I believe that a program like this, especially in Latin America, really fosters entrepreneurship in the region. And what I found out is that this is a program, first of all, it's amazing because the reach of Shark Tank Mexico is throughout Latin America. It's not just in Mexico. And it's, I believe it's the most watched cable show in Latin America, more than, stuff like The Voice or America's Got Talent or stuff like this. And it's very interesting because the program is usually watched by families. And you have these, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids that really want to become entrepreneurs and that actually play or role play as sharks with their parents, and their parents present projects to them and they criticize them and they say, like, I don't like your business model, or why is your valuation so high? And these stories are incredible. And when I meet these people, when I meet kids or when I meet young entrepreneurs that tell me that because of the show they became entrepreneurs and they have the strength to become an entrepreneur, and I think that's the legacy that this show and myself want to leave. Basically foster entrepreneurship, create prosperity through entrepreneurship, and I think that's what the show. I think that's the most important thing that the show leaves.
And what does it mean to you personally to be on Shark Tank Mexico?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, for starters, I became a public persona, which I'm not used to. And it's difficult to handle this. I have a name that's very strange, Marcus Dantus. I'm the only one in the world, so I've always had to be very careful because, my grandfather used to say that the only thing you live in life is your name. And when you have a strange name, everybody points at you when you do something that's not, or that you don't want to be remembered by. But now as a public persona, it's even more important because, now I really have to be on my good behavior all the time. It's interesting. It's interesting that I've always thought that, television or the movies make you larger than life. And that's actually very interesting when I meet people, they want to take pictures with me. They want my autograph. They want to have a conversation with me. That's, it's interesting. It's great to be able to influence people positively. So I really like that.
You just mentioned your grandfather, and you've mentioned before that you've been inspired by his lessons. Tell us a little bit more about him, and how did those teachings shape your own entrepreneurial journey?
Well, my grandfather was an entrepreneur. I mean, he came from Russia at the early 20th century, the beginning of 1912, I believe. He came to Mexico with nothing, and he started a life here. He was an electrician. His first job, if I remember correctly, was to set up the lighting in the streets of Mexico. And throughout his life, he was a very ambitious person. He was a hard worker, and he ended up with several small factories that I basically got introduced to and learned a little bit about what he did. And every time I met with him, he had a lesson for me. Like, the most important thing is the price in which you buy, not the price in which you sell, or, stuff like this. He even taught me how to play poker, taking all the money. I mean, he was very interesting in that regard. He was very ambitious. My father, on the contrary, is a very modest guy, very humble. And I believe that the combination of both of them is what brings me to what I am today. But definitely in the entrepreneurial side, it was my grandfather that inspired.
And what was one of the most inspirational lessons that you keep with you?
I think it was a poker one, to be honest with you. I was around 13 years old. I played poker with my friends all the time. And when he learned about this, he invited me to his house, and he said, "I heard you like poker." And I said, "Sure." And so we sat down and we started playing poker together. And, he would bet a little, I would bet a little, etc. And then at some point, I remember that he bet a lot of money, which I didn't have. So he said, "You don't have money?" "No." "Okay." So he took all the money and left. And he said, "Well, that's what you have to watch out, in poker, because if people have more money than you, you'll get destroyed." And he never gave me back my money. So I was furious then. I think I understand it now. I think, but that was a big lesson.
What was your first job, and how did it shape you?
My first job was when I finished college. My first real job, when I think, because I did everything when I was a kid. I was a counselor in camp and stuff like that. But my first real job when I graduated college was to work as an account executive for Leo Burnett Advertising. And I used to handle the Camino Real account, which was a big hotel chain in Mexico City. And yeah, that was the first thing I did.
And how did that experience shape you?
Well, it taught me how to work. It taught me that I had the ability to grow, because I grew quickly from, assistant executive to supervisor in the account. And it taught me how to, do meeting minutes and follow the minutes. It was very interesting. I really liked it. And I was very happy with the job, actually.
Tell us a little bit more about the creation of andcom and the lessons learned from its success.
Yeah, that's a fun story. I always wanted to be a film director in Mexico. This is why I studied communications, more focused on film. And when I came back to Mexico, I started, with advertising agencies and production agencies. And I tried to do film in Mexico, but it really was a bad time. There was no, government aid for filming. There was really no incentives. And the movies in Mexico were probably going through the worst. I mean, now they're very famous and they win Oscars, but then the movies were awful. And at some point, a friend of mine taught me, well, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, "Have you seen internet?" And I was like, "No." I've heard about it, but I haven't seen. This is in 1993. Um, so he took me to his house, and he did two things. He used to trade shares, and at the same time, he used to play backgammon on the internet with a very ugly interface. But you know, uh, and and I was impressed by the medium. I couldn't believe that you could post something and people all over the world could see it. And his brother was behind us, and he was creating his own webpage. And I was like, "What do you mean you're creating your own webpage?" And he taught me a little bit of HTML. I used to study computer science before, so I picked it up quickly. And I, basically sat at home for the next 2 weeks creating my own webpage. So eventually, that webpage was hosted on a service called CompuServe. I'm talking ancient story here, ancient history, and the domain was something like ourworld.compuserve.com /free users /pages / a number, and it was fun because on the webpage I actually put a counter. I don't know if you remember those counters they used to put on the web pages that counted how many people entered your webpage.
Oh yeah, I remember those.
And every time I would enter it, I would see that 50, 100 people were entering the webpage every day, and maybe more and more and more. And I was impressed by it. I later found out that it was probably half of the times it was me checking out the counter. But anyway, the other half were real people. And a friend of mine told me, well, if it's getting popular, why don't you put a good domain name on the page? And I was like, what's a domain name? And then I started learning about domain names, and I said, man, this is amazing. And in those times, we were using modems, so internet was super slow. So I wanted to put a domain name that represented Mexico and speed at the same time. So I registered speedygonzalez.com. And just as I was setting to put my webpage on speedygonzalez.com, I got a cease or desist letter from Warner Brothers. They actually called me after the letter, and they said that it's their domain, and they registered. And I was super scared. So I said, no, I registered for you, and I gave it back to them. And all my friends were like, you're crazy. You should have gotten some money. I just didn't want any trouble. So almost out of spite, I registered andale.com, which is exactly, it almost represented the same thing without the brand. And a couple of weeks after I actually put my website there, I got a call from some guys in Silicon Valley. I didn't even know what Silicon Valley was then. And they wanted to purchase the domain name. And I said, what do you mean you want to purchase the domain name? And they offered me $10,000. And I honestly thought it was a joke. So I said, look, give me $20,000 and it's yours. And they deposited $20,000. So I was like, man, this is the best business in the world. So I started registering a lot of domain names in Spanish, generic, so I didn't have any trouble. And this is how I began my entrepreneurial career, if you will.
Absolutely. I love it. And in your opinion, what makes a good domain name on the internet today, and why? And do you have examples of really good ones and maybe some terrible ones?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think that as extensions have grown, I think that the domain name has lost some of its value because now you can register. So at that stage, when I registered all these domain names, I ended up with Mexico.com, and that was actually my next business. But I think that today you have so many options of how to register a word, because it could be .net or .org or .co or .io you have a plethora of possibilities. That I think still, of course, .com is the main domain name, but now you can substitute it, and that kind of makes the domain lose money. I remember that in those days, there was a very famous case of a company that acquired business.com for $7 million, the domain name, which even up until today, I think that was ridiculous. I don't think anything is worth anything like that. No.
What are your thoughts on the Web3 sector and how developments there will impact the domain industry?
Well, first of all, they have their own domains, which are interesting. And again, it just adds to the plethora of possibilities of registering domain names. I, I, I think that anything that has to do with blockchain, for example, is very interesting. Uh, I think that it's a technology that we're just scratching the surface of what we can use it for. I'm not such a big believer on cryptocurrencies as of yet. I think the volatility is very dangerous, but I think that blockchain as a technology could solve a lot of issues. And I'll give you a few examples. I think that, for example, we should be voting on blockchain, and that way there wouldn't be any fraud when voting, or the property registry should be on blockchain. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we could use the technology for that would be very interesting and that would solve many problems. I like what's happening in Web3.
We've come to understand you're driven, in a sense, by mentoring others to succeed and accomplish their goals. Is there an anecdote or a story that you could share that demonstrates your work with others that have helped them realize their dreams of starting a business or pursuing their passions?
Worked with probably over 2,000 entrepreneurs. Some of these guys have built very interesting businesses. I'll give you an example of the early ones. I was one of the first investors in Mexico's first crowdfunding company called Play Business. And these guys have grown a lot. I mean, they've been in business for, I think, 9 or 10 years now. And the company has grown a lot, and it's, doing a lot of very interesting transactions. It's spawned a bunch of other companies that now do the same. So I think it's a very interesting story. And they met with me when they had the idea. I invested a little bit of money on them. And that's where the company grew from. But there are honestly so many stories, not just from Shark Tank, but from Startup Mexico, that we've helped, create new companies from them. And even the stories that fail, to be honest with you, I think that what we leave them with is, this path to entrepreneurship. And in many cases, what we've seen is that a couple of entrepreneurs that fail get together and do another company. And that's very interesting, because what we want to create is entrepreneurs. I'm not that focused on the company, but on the mentality of the entrepreneur, I think.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue to my next question, where, as a serial entrepreneur, as someone who works with a lot of entrepreneurs, what is the biggest mistake that you've made or that you've seen be made that future entrepreneurs can learn from?
Oh, there's so many. So I'll tell you, one of the biggest reasons why entrepreneurs eventually fail in countries like Mexico has to do with fighting amongst the partners. It's very interesting. And I'm not talking about, I understand that you could have fights when the company's doing bad, but when the company's doing good, you also have fights. Latin America is not a place where collaboration is that developed, and we don't collaborate that well. And I think it's very important. One of the things we teach in the entrepreneurship mind frame is to collaborate. But I've seen many mistakes. I've seen, most entrepreneurs actually have very little knowledge of finances, for example. Yeah. And, many people, in fact, study, for example, design because they don't want to deal with finances and accounting and, subjects like this. And when you create a business, you got to at least understand, if you're making money and how long will it last? Those two things, just a cash flow report or an income statement. So that's a very recurring mistake. Another mistake that I've seen, especially with engineers, is or researchers or scientists, is that they sometimes develop something because they have the ability to develop it, but there's no real problem that they're solving, and then they end up with a solution looking for a problem, and that's a really bad way to start a business. So, I mean, there's sure there's a bunch of mistakes that are recurring in entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. And you've spoken a lot about how difficult being an entrepreneur is. And sometimes it's easy to judge from the outside and say, oh, well, you get to make your own hours and take a long weekend here and there. But ultimately, your point has been that everything rests on the entrepreneur's shoulders. And I founded Capital Analytics, and I absolutely hear you there. It's nice to be able to say, okay, well, I need to take a long weekend here or there. But it doesn't stop you from waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning with whatever issue happens to be plaguing you at that moment in time.
Let me put it this way. I actually, so there's two paths you can take. You can take the employee path or the entrepreneur path. And they're very different. So to me, becoming an employee is like riding a carousel. There's not a lot of excitement. So the carousel goes around, and then Friday comes and you cash your check, and then it goes around again. Maybe you could change the horse, but that's all it does. Entrepreneurship is like a roller coaster. I mean, you're up and down, and you suffer, and you're happy, and sometimes in the same hour you're both sad and happy. So it's not for everybody, and it's even more interesting. Everyone can do it, but it's not for everybody all the time. Some people sometimes don't want to ride the roller coaster. They'd rather sell with a carousel. So that's how I view it.
And would you say that that's maybe one of the biggest things that a future entrepreneur should be prepared for, that roller coaster ride, not a carousel?
Well, it's incredibly interesting. I've been an entrepreneur for now almost 30 years, and I can tell you that I have the scars to prove it. And I don't get scared that easily. Even if the company is doing bad and something really bad happened to us, I know that it will change eventually. And that kind of, mind frame is, you can only get it with experience. So yes, I think that entrepreneurs need to know that they're going to suffer, and that this is it's a more difficult path, but it also has a lot of benefits. Like, for example, you own your failures, you own your successes. And to me, that's very gratifying.
And now, in your capacity as CEO of Startup Mexico, what do you believe should be Mexico's tech priorities right now?
Well, look, Mexico has an incredible startup ecosystem. First of all, you have to understand that the country is enjoying a demographic bonus. Over half of the population is under 30 years of age. Talent is amazing. We quadrupled the university enrollments in the last 20 years. So there's a lot going on for the country. It's a big country with a young population, with a lot of talent, with a lot of resources. But there's no long-term plans by government. So every 6 years we change, and it's very difficult to achieve something in 6 years. There's no long-term policies, and I think that for example, the government right now is not that interested in fostering entrepreneurship or in creating a stronger middle class, for example. And I think that's a big mistake. And I think we're wasting an incredible opportunity. I mean, think about it. We are now the US's most important commercial partner. We are one of two countries that connects continents. It's Turkey and Mexico, which are actually very similar in many ways. So Turkey connects Europe and Asia. Mexico connects Latin America with the Anglo-Saxon world. And the US is the largest market in the world, and we are right next to it. And we should be their factory. So nearshoring opportunities are booming. I mean, there's a lot of potential that we should be able to take advantage of, but we are not.
How can we take advantage of it better?
You have to have a government. It's not just the government. It's everything. I think you have to have a government that helps SMBs be creative and grow. I think we have to to be less bureaucratic. I think we have to, give fiscal incentives to these companies. We have to have a, better application of the law so that more people invest in Mexico and feel comfortable investing in these companies. I'll give you one example. In Mexico, if you have a fund and the fund invests in, let's say, 5 companies and 2 of them go bankrupt and 3 do well, you cannot consolidate that and just pay taxes on the ones, the difference between what you lost. The ones that you lost are gone, and the ones that you, as a fund or as an investor, and the ones that you make money on, you have to help pay full taxes on them.
Yeah.
So all those things de-incentivize investors from investing in Mexico. We need more exit strategies. We need a NASDAQ type market, stock market. We need more mergers and acquisitions. You have to understand, when you enter the Mexican market, you have the potential of entering, 650 million people throughout Latin America, because we are to Peru or to Colombia like the US is to us. So they aspire to reach this market. So the potential is there again, but I think there's a lot of things we need to do to truly exploit it.
And now a little lightning round for you. Describe yourself in one word.
Wow. That was not the word, by the way. I'll say interesting. Let's put it that way.
And why is that?
Well, I'm not a typical kind of person. I think I'm very different in many ways. I've always created my own, personality out of everything that I learned. So it's made me an interesting hybrid, I think.
How would you define resiliency?
That's pushing through obstacles.
What's the most impactful book that you've read?
Well, at what age? John Livingston Seagull and all those books were amazing to me. When I was a teenager, I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that changed my life. I love that book. Last week, I read the second book by Yuval Noah. I think it was amazing. So there's many books that have changed my life.
And what makes you happy?
I think I'm a pretty happy guy. I think everything makes me happy. My family makes me happy. My friends make me happy. Sleeping well makes me really happy.
And if I forget everything that you've said today, what's the one thing that you want me to remember?
I think the importance of entrepreneurship in developing countries, the importance of what it can actually do, both to aid with the people's prosperity and to make the country more, and the region more equitable, more competitive, more fair, etc.
Well, thank you again. That was Marcus Dantus, the CEO of Startup Mexico and Shark on Shark Tank Mexico. Marcus, thank you again.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
You've been watching Invest Insights with Abby Lindenberg. Don't forget to join Abby and your next guest, Hannah Topler, founder and CEO of social startup Intraray. Please remember to subscribe, like, and follow. For even greater depth, subscribe to our website to download our annual business reports and register for our all-encompassing newsletter, and never miss a single insight. For Invest Insights, thanks for watching.